Hello, and welcome to the Election Show. I'm Matt McDermott, Communication Strategist and Vice President at Women Insight Strategies, and joined today via Zoom, political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Dr. Christina Greer is unfortunately not able to join with us this morning. We had originally recorded a live show on Wednesday morning before the attacks in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday afternoon, and before the release of a supposed concession speech by Donald Trump. We'll talk more about that today. And while our friend Dr. Greer is unable to join us, we still felt it was important to come together and discuss the events of the past few days that happened between the initial taping of our show and today. So let's jump right into it. And Lincoln, I really want to hear from you first. You have been one of the foremost advocates in this country over the past few years about the degradation of our democracy, about the threat that the presidency of Donald Trump faces towards the American people. And we saw that come through this week. I'm really curious your thoughts on what we saw this week, why it matters, and what the impact of it moving forward is, not only in the next few weeks, but in the years to come as it relates to our democracy.
Well, I wrote a piece earlier in the week for a European site, and I wrote about how Americans at this moment have a right to be angry about what happened. They even have a right to be frightened about what happened. A lot of other reactions, sad, upset, but we don't really have a right to be surprised. This was always coming. This or something like it was always how the Trump administration was going to end, because we knew he would not accept defeat, and we knew he would mobilize his most radical white supremacist base, angry supporters to defend that fantasy. And ultimately we saw, that's what we saw in the Capitol. And there's a lot to say about this. And I could, I'm not a senator, I don't have a filibuster, so I'll keep my comments relatively brief, but I will say a couple of things, really three things here. First, it was a festival of white privilege, that those people got that close to the Capitol. That doesn't happen by accident, right? That they were not immediately arrested, that they weren't thrown on the ground with plastic handcuffs until enough vans came to take them away. But also the white privilege of the Josh Hawleys and the Donald Trumps to encourage a riot, to encourage violence at the Capitol and get away with it over and over and over again. So it is not just the people who were in that building, who trespassed, broke in, who need to be arrested and indicted, but it is the people who encouraged them to do that. The other point I would make, and this is maybe not front and center, but it's important. After everything settled down and they resumed their deliberations, people from both parties talked about how America, what is the rest of the world thinking? We're supposed to be this beacon. The world looks to us. We need to get beyond those myths. I travel all over the world for work. I've studied and lived in other countries. Everybody knows what America is. American racism is not a secret we've concealed from the rest of the world. America's undemocratic political institutions are not a secret. I remember doing democracy work in the early part of this century when one of the challenges I had was that organizers, pro-democracy organizers all over the world, believed that George Bush had stolen the 2000 election. What we saw Wednesday is evidence that we are not something special. We are an ordinary country. We're not the one country that is unique, the light to all humankind or something, right? We have to recognize these problems, and we can only recognize these problems when we begin by saying everyone has problems and we're part of that everyone. The last point, and I promised I wouldn't filibuster, is this. This is not going to go away. This is a very, very important moment in American democracy. We cannot put this toothpaste back into the tube. And the notion that this is where the fever breaks, this is where people move away from Donald Trump, that is abject fantasy. Polls I've seen show that 45% of Republicans support what we saw on Wednesday. My question is, do you think in a month from now that number will be closer to 35 or closer to 55? I believe very certainly that it will be closer to 55.
That brings up such an important point, Lincoln, because I think one of the struggles I've had in the coverage of these events over the past few days is there's been presented this false dichotomy between, do we need to hold the people accountable for what happened, or should we, since there's only about a week left, a week and a half left in this presidency, just move on, just accept the fact that this was a moment in our history, and we should move towards a different future under Joe Biden as president. I guess the challenge I have with that dichotomy is, one, I just don't think it's true. And to your point, how does this fever dream end if Republicans can't step up and admit the reality of what they've caused? And I think, you've seen over the past day or so, a few select Republicans starting to beat this drum. Mitt Romney, of course, who's advocated for Trump's removal for a while now. You had Ben Sass on TV on Friday morning, essentially saying that if the House did pass articles of impeachment, he'd be willing to consider those. It seems to me like now is a real inflection point for the Republican Party to decide, are they going to shut this down, or will they be the party of terrorism moving forward? I'm curious your thoughts, and I'm just curious if they are unable to make that decision and move away from this moment in a way that actually secures the future of our country. What are the implications politically, not only for the Republican Party, but for electoral politics moving forward?
Well, one way to think about that question is that if you woke up Monday morning this week, the first Monday of the new year before this all happened, and you were a Republican elected official or part of the Trump administration, and you thought that what was happening thus far in the past 4 days, 4 hours, or 4 years, if you'd been there that long, was okay. If you thought that was okay and not a threat to American democracy, you were either deliberately deluding yourself, or frankly, you're too stupid to be in government. And the reason I say that is because you're absolutely right. I would say this: the only way we move on past this is by restoring rule of law. If we don't impeach, and I want to put the 25th Amendment aside, that's a process that's going to take too long, and it's really not what the 25th Amendment is for. Donald Trump has been mentally incapacitated, sufficiently incapacitated that he shouldn't have been in office from the very beginning. That hasn't particularly changed.
And I mean, tell our viewers a bit of the difference between sort of the implications of the 25th Amendment and the implications of impeachment, because I think we've seen sort of some confusion in coverage of this, at least sort of after Wednesday, where there's this perception that the 25th Amendment and impeachment, serve the same function, when really they're intended for very different events. They're intended to do very different things. Impeachment has very different implications versus the 25th. I'm curious sort of your thoughts between the difference between those two, and which strategy is best for both political parties in the coming days.
Well, one way to think about this is impeachment was a process created by the founders for what to do when you have a president who is committing high crimes and misdemeanors, who is endangering the country, who is not keeping his oath. If that may sound like Donald Trump to you, it probably should. So it is a political solution to a political problem. The challenge of impeachment is the bar is high. You have to have a majority in the House, which Nancy Pelosi can get that on tomorrow, and 2/3 of the Senate, which is going to be difficult, but it's no longer absolutely impossible. Although I think it's very difficult. The 25th Amendment was written as a way to make clear a lot of issues related to secession. So included in those issues are exactly when the vice president takes over, just to clarify that kind of thing. But what it also does is it talks about what happens if, due to a medical emergency, the president is no longer able to be in office. So, for example, I don't want to get morbid here, but let's say the president falls down and hits his or her head and goes into a coma. I mean, I don't know if that happened. I'm not a doctor, but you get the point, right? Then you could have a 25th Amendment process to turn the presidency over to the vice president because the president is incapacitated. He or she has a bad stroke. The challenge with Trump is that the argument 25th Amendment is that he is mentally or psychologically unfit for office. That is a difficult question to answer, right? That requires, and it doesn't, and even if you get him out on the 25th Amendment, yes, you remove the clear danger, the clear and present danger that he represents by remaining in office, but you don't have the political condemnation. You don't have Congress standing up, both parties, and saying, this is not okay anymore.
And I think sort of to just add on to that a little bit, I think one of the arguments for impeachment too, which I'm hopeful that more will be speaking up on in the days ahead, is if impeachment does move through, if they are able to pass articles of impeachment through the House and the Senate, it negates the ability for Donald Trump to ever run for president again. He cannot hold public office if impeachment passes. And I think what I've at least seen in the past few days is some initial recognition, not a lot of it, but some of it among Republicans, that this might be an avenue that's essentially an exit ramp for them. This provides them an ability to say, you know what, Donald Trump only has a week and a half left. He's going to probably serve out the remainder of his presidency, but we can't have him involved in the party again. We can't have him run 4 years from now because it would fundamentally end the Republican Party as we know it. It seems to me like there's actually an advantage for Senate Republicans right now to vote for impeachment, if only to tell Donald Trump his electoral future is done with this party. He cannot run again. He cannot run in 2024. There will be a new Republican nominee in 4 years. It seems to me like among the Ted Cruzes of the world, perhaps not Josh Hawley, but perhaps, the Tom Cottons of the world, there would be interest there in passing these articles of impeachment, if only to tell Trump he can't run again. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, remember that the Senate vote, is a trial in the Senate. If they vote to convict, he's out of office almost immediately. So even if there's 1 day left, he leaves office. My sense,
and to be clear, I'll just add, Lincoln, the reason I'm sort of suggesting this is it's a bit complicated right now, but what seems to be fact right now is the Senate is currently out of session. And there's some legal confusion as to whether the Senate can actually come back into session until I think it's January 19th, which essentially gives them all but 24 hours to remove the president. So the point is not he would be immediately removed. He would be. It's more legally right now that might not actually be able to happen until literally hours before the inauguration anyway.
There's another quirk here too, which is that the two senators who won, remember that seems like a lifetime ago, but Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, who won on Tuesday in Georgia, once they're certified, they take office almost immediately. So we could have a new majority leader in a matter of days as well, because that's also going on in the Senate. My sense is that the question for the Republican Party is that are they going to continue, which your question gets at, are they going to continue to allow themselves to be held hostage by the Trump MAGA cult? Because if you are looking at running in 2024 for president, say, or if you have a primary coming up, yes, you want Trump out of the way. Trump is obviously would lose badly to Biden or Kamala Harris or anyone else in 2024. But you're thinking, I still need to get those voters to win a primary. And this, where we should be thinking about a lot is 2022. All of these people, a week ago, a threat from Donald Trump to primary you was a very potent threat to a guy like Brian Kemp, a guy like John Thune up in South Dakota. I suspect that today they're thinking about that differently. And if they are, then that really shows the weaknesses and the weakening, not of Trumpism, because I'm not sure what Trumpism is, but of Donald Trump specifically.
I want to talk for a few minutes about the legal implications of all of this. Obviously, there are huge legal implications for anyone that was involved in this insurrection. Quite literally, it's a federal crime to break into the halls of Congress as they did. And it seems like after Wednesday, where there basically were no arrests, there was no engagement by police to really take this down in any way and arrest the people involved. It seems like there's really been a change of tune over the last few days from both the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. and the FBI now actively investigating it, actively putting out wanted posters for those that they've been able to visualize as being in Congress at that time. So it seems like they're taking action against the insurrection itself. I'm interested in your perspective on the legal implications for Donald Trump. And part of the reason I'm curious about it is I think there's a lot more to learn about what took place in the days and weeks leading up to this. It seems to me like there is now evidence, looking back in hindsight, that there were concerns about a coup attempt from some of the highest officials in this country in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th. You saw just a few days before Wednesday, in a unanimous fashion, the former secretaries of defense put out a joint letter in the press, essentially saying that violence is not tolerable, and there is a new president-elect, and there will be a peaceful transition of power. You've seen indications from other White House officials who have now resigned in the days after Wednesday, essentially suggesting that there were conversations in the White House in the days leading up to this about a coup attempt. It feels like we're in a situation where there may be new evidence that comes out that this was not just, an insurrection among the people that took things too far, that there was actually engagement within the White House at some senior level with these rioters, with these insurrectionists that led to the events on Wednesday. I'm curious your perspective on what the legal implications are for Trump himself and members of his administration and what we might see moving forward. I know even just this morning, we're now seeing rumors that the White House legal counsel might be resigning in the next day or two, which to me would indicate that there's concern about the legal implications of this event. What are your thoughts on this, and what does it mean for Trump's legal future?
In a political sense, when we talk about somebody, he incited riot, right? We can say that empirically speaking, he incited riot, just like Rudy Giuliani incited a police riot in 1991 in Lower Manhattan. But from a legal perspective, that's a hard conviction to get, right? It's a hard conviction. So but you have to look into it, and you have to look into conspiracy to incite a riot, them working together. Now, it is worth noting we will have a real attorney general with a very real legal resume, Merrick Garland, probably pretty soon. And so there will be the ability to do that. The question is, how does the new president want to handle this? It seems to me that the challenge here is that as long as enough Republicans, remember 138 or 140 House Republicans came back after all of this and still voted, that the election for the objections to the states. Right. So there is still support within the Republican Party. So I think you have to have some kind of a commission to look into this. What was the communication between the White House for sure, the people themselves who were breaking in, who ultimately broke into the Capitol, and the law enforcement? We know that law enforcement in the United States is in a lot of cases infiltrated by white supremacists. We know there's those kind of communications going on. So there's a lot to investigate. Then I think the legal indictments fall out from there. But I don't think anyone should be untouchable here. The way we restore rule of law is by convicting people when they incite people to try to violently overthrow the United States government. Like, that seems like the reasonable position. And the fact that you happen to be an impeached president in your last days in office shouldn't exempt you from that.
And so obviously, the executive branch is one side of this coin. The legislative branch is the other side of the coin. There were obviously members of Congress, as you allude to, both in the House and the Senate, who in no uncertain terms incited violence. You had members of Congress, Congressman Brooks, literally speaking at the event in the hours leading up to this riot, and quite literally with his words inciting violence, telling them to kick ass and take charge. What are the implications for members of Congress here? Because obviously Democrats will control both the House and the Senate in the weeks ahead. Should there be action against those members of Congress, Republicans, who incited this effort, and not only incited this effort, but in the hours after it, still went ahead and propagated these ludicrous conspiracy theories in the halls of Congress about the election, which we know are not true, and we know are what led to this event?
Well, a couple things I would say. The first question is, will Congress, either house, censure some of these people, right? So the most obvious names are Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Congressman Brooks. I think Devin Nunes comes to mind. The people who actively engaged in a disinformation campaign, and knowing that they were participating, and other people were inciting those people to riot, right? So it's a complicated. But on the other hand, and I say censure because to get a conviction on this stuff is very difficult. And if you set that bar and you miss that bar, then you feel like you've accomplished nothing. Censure, a report, a commission, find out exactly what happened. And the person that I would watch in Congress most closely here is Kevin McCarthy, because the House has a very big caucus. Well over half of the House Republicans voted for the objections, even after all of this. Kevin McCarthy wants to be Speaker, And to do that, he has to build a Republican majority. And if he thinks that the way to the Republican majority is to stick with Trump because of the way that states are gerrymandered, the districts are drawn, or because he thinks that they can make Biden look like a bad president for 2 years, then we're never going to move forward from this. And if he thinks that Trump is now a drag on the party, he's going to behave differently.
So with a few minutes left, I want to have a bit of a conversation about the historical context for all of this, because I've been slightly concerned over the past few days with remarks from a few folks on social media, a few pundits, essentially suggesting that either this, wasn't a full-blown coup, or our democracy and our constitution worked because it wasn't successful. And we obviously have historical precedent for coups that weren't successful only a few years later to then be successful. I mean, it seems to me like if we don't take care of what's happened now, if we don't hold those accountable now, if we just look towards the future and hope that we can unite this country, it seems to me like we're missing the forest for the trees here, wherein this insurrectionist behavior isn't going to go away. These attitudes aren't going to go away. The anger is only going to foment. What is sort of the historical precedent for this? And what lessons should we learn in the United States about those historical lessons to hopefully prevent this from ever happening again?
As far as the precedents, from other countries, because we don't have a lot of experience with this here, what we see is that these kinds of things happen not because a democracy is strong, but because a democracy is weak. And what we've seen really throughout this century is more and more indications that the system, that the structures aren't working. We've had 2 presidents elected despite losing the popular vote. We've had a Supreme Court that has gotten way unaligned with the will of the American people because of our quirky, undemocratic Constitution. And we are unable to solve problems, policy problems, which then exacerbate the anger and exacerbate the polarizations. What struck me is that this is an inflection point, as you said earlier in the show, as others have said. And at an inflection point, you either go this way or you go this way. You don't just sit there, and you can't go backwards. And that's what we're hearing from those who say the Constitution worked. Let me just raise a question here. If we elected our president by popular vote and we had Joe Biden winning, not, basically rough numbers, 81 million to 74 million, would we be having a discussion about this? The 3 states that could have flipped, a total of 50,000 well-placed votes flipping, and Trump carries the Electoral College. Imagine the crisis we'd be in then. Imagine if only 25,000 votes were needed. He would have succeeded more. We are very lucky. The Constitution worked here because, frankly, of the courage of a handful of people, the strength of American civil society, and the goodwill of the American people. But it's time, and critically important, to take a long look at how we strengthen American democracy so this doesn't happen again. Instead of saying, oh, we're lucky we had such a strong system that people stormed the Capitol, but fortunately nobody was killed. That's not how one should think about politics.
So just with our last few minutes then, let's talk about that question, which is what happens now. There's just over a week left in Donald Trump's administration that we know of, at least. It seems like the House is ready to move pretty expeditiously with impeachment. From what we've heard today, it sounds like that might happen early next week. What happens between now and January 20th? Both what is going to happen and what should happen in your mind?
Well, if you're the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, you have nothing to lose by this impeachment. Clearly, he should be impeached. Your members want him to be impeached. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they move that through very quickly and put it on the Senate. At least you have the Republic from a political perspective. The Republicans in the Senate are kind of in the hot seat for a week. But we don't. But that's not. But I still, if I had to bet, I'd say he's not removed. He finishes out the term. Joe Biden will get sworn in on January 20th. That's the good news for American democracy. But these problems, I don't see them going away. And we have to recognize, you say just over a week, but just over a week in Donald Trump time could be
a whole heck of a lot of days.
Yeah, it could be like 100 years. I mean, he has shown an extraordinary ability over and over and over again to damage the country, to damage the democracy. And he is still able to do that. I mean, he has the nuclear codes. I don't think it's going to go that way, but you could certainly see him encouraging more violence, right? You could certainly see him continuing this disinformation campaign. And I would just say this: we're recording Friday morning. Wednesday was when this happened. On Thursday, so those 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, we're kind of working with the fallout of all of this. Those 2 days combined, almost 8,000 Americans died of COVID in those 2 days.
Yeah.
And the disinformation campaign, the bungling of the vaccine rollout, just letting this get worse. Don't forget that event, when they stormed the Capitol, that could be a super spreader event. So I expect COVID to get worse in the next week. And every week that COVID gets worse is a month of problems for the new administration. So I'm greatly relieved we only have a week to go, but I don't feel like this is over yet at all.
No, and you bring up such a great point. Is not only have we seen 2 straight days now of the most COVID deaths in the United States since the start of this pandemic, we also saw job numbers out this morning that are frankly abysmal. We've lost over 100,000 jobs in the past month, and it's clear that the economy is not in any position to recover coming out of this crisis. And it really presents a real challenge for the incoming Democratic Congress, not only to hold the people accountable for their actions of the past week, but really immediately moving ahead to rectify the challenges with vaccine distribution and also with the economy. I guess quickly, Lincoln, 30 seconds left. Given we have a new incoming Congress, given the events in Georgia this week where Democrats won 2 Senate seats, just very quickly, what should be the priorities of this new Democratic Congress after January 20th?
Make sure that the implementation of the vaccinations is done well, and get money into American people's hands so that they don't starve. We have a polar vortex coming, so the people can stay warm, so they can survive what's going to be a very tough few months. Ignore this right-wing Ayn Randian nonsense about austerity and about not helping people because they might not want to look for jobs. Put money in people's hands, help them survive this difficult time, get vaccines into people's arms, and maybe we can survive as a country.
Well, obviously a lot there, and a lot, to your point, Lincoln, it has really just changed in the past 48 hours. Really appreciate you joining me today, Lincoln, and talking through all of this, given the events of the past few days. Obviously a lot more to come in the weeks ahead, and looking to talk about it further with you and with Dr. Christina Greer in the days and weeks ahead. So thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to continuing this conversation as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you.